Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today we're going to Washington, D.C. during those first months after the beginning of the Civil War. Specifically, we're going to Georgetown, which is an adjacent town that's part of the D.C. area, and the story of this man pictured here. His name is George William Arnold Jr., and he numbered among the many Washingtonians who had Southern sympathies. And he was also among that number who decided to do something about it. In 1861, he left Georgetown, left his family, and crossed over into Virginia, made his way to Richmond, and joined the Confederate military. Arnold had an impressive resume, not military, but academic. Yale, class of 1850, got a master's degree in 1856, studied law in Baltimore, and was admitted to the Maryland bar. Then he moved to Washington, 1850s, and became headmaster of an academy in Georgetown. And then the war came, and then he left, made his way to Richmond, and joined the Army. You can imagine, because of his education, that the engineers were a great opportunity for him. And so he joined the Confederate States Engineer Corps, made himself at home in the defenses of Richmond, helping to direct construction and making sure all the materials were there. And he served in that capacity until from about late 1861 to early 1862. At that point, he received orders to report to the defenses of Norfolk, where he was performing the same duties. Later that year in 1862, he transferred to the Niter and Mining Bureau, which is arguably one of the most important, one of the most critical agencies in wartime Richmond. In fact, in the wartime Confederate States. This organization was responsible in supplying the Confederate States with needed copper, iron, lead, saltpeter, sulfur, zinc, and other precious and valuable materials to make gunpowder and munitions and all of that stuff. So critical to go through the infrastructure of the states and to be able to gather those materials to keep the armies supplied. So he joins the Niter and Mining Bureau with a promotion, and you see him pictured here as a captain of artillery. And he was sent to Augusta, Georgia, where there's a powder works and other factories. His range was Georgia and Florida, but he traveled throughout the South. In 1862 and 1863, you'll see his name turns up in Chattanooga, in Atlanta, in Charleston, South Carolina, Knoxville, Tennessee, and in Mississippi. At some point, he received help. His two younger brothers joined him as civilian contractors. Those younger brothers, Charles Albert Arnold and Samuel Bland Arnold. Both of these boys were veterans of the Confederate 1st Maryland Infantry who had left the regiment with disability discharges. Charles and Sam appeared, if you look at records, appears to have served their older brother, Arnold, as a clerk. And this is according to research by author Nathaniel C. Hughes, Jr. in his book, Yale's Confederates. Now, in early 1864, Charles and Sam, the brothers, returned to Maryland, possibly due to the illness of their mother. Arnold remained behind in Augusta with his wife and children, who joined him at some point. But by this time, Arnold was not feeling well. He had become plagued with some sort of a chronic illness. And before the end of 1864, he resigned his commission, left the Bureau and Augusta, and returned north, getting to Baltimore with his family. Now, remember, we're in the late 1864 by this point. A few months later, in April of 1865, John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. During the ensuing investigation, authorities arrested Arnold's brother Sam for his alleged connection to the plot. A military tribunal found him guilty and sentenced Sam to life in prison, along with other co-conspirators. The question you may have, and one that I did too, was what did Big Brother Arnold know about all of this? Well, as far as research is concerned, there's no connection. It's not an awareness beyond being a biological brother, no evidence that he was aware of Sam's activities, and no connection, no known connection to Booth. But it gets interesting here. Sam was found guilty, or I should say, more interesting. Sam was found guilty of conspiracy, as you students of the Civil War and the Lincoln conspirators know. He was found guilty of conspiracy by that military tribunal and sentenced to life in prison at the Dry Tortugas, that's Fort Jefferson, on the southern tip of Florida, along with Samuel Mudd, Michael O'Laughlin, and Edmund Spangler. O'Laughlin died in 1867. In 1869, Arnold, Mudd, and Spangler and Sam were pardoned by President Andrew Johnson, released. Now you may wonder, and this is where it's an interesting twist, what became of Arnold? In the fall of 1865, not long after the conspiracy trial of his brother ended, and while Sam had been sent to the Dry Tortugas and irons, and the other co-conspirators languished in prison, Arnold disappeared. A Yale classmate reported that he believed that Arnold was murdered, but we don't know. His name disappears from the record. He's gone. He left behind his wife, Elizabeth, and two children, a boy and a girl. They all survived him, but not by much. Elizabeth died in 1870, and one of the children, their son Paul, died in 1888. Both mother and son are buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C., but you won't easily find them because their graves are unmarked. Now, there was a daughter, Fanny. She married a lieutenant colonel in the Union Army. His name is George Walter Paschal, and he served in the Union's 2nd Texas Cavalry, which was organized at Brownsville in December of 1863 of Union-loyal, Constitution-loyal Texans. Paschal went on to become a Texas Ranger. They eventually moved to Washington. He died in 1918 and is buried alongside Fanny in Arlington National Cemetery. So there you have the story of the Arnold family and the interesting connections they have to the Confederate Army, to the Niter and Mining Bureau, to the Lincoln conspiracy. Again, George William Arnold, we don't know what came of him. He disappears in the fall of 1865, believed to be murdered. Still a question mark. He's missing in action. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.